Morning, Marco. Thanks very much for talking to me.
Good morning, Amanda.
We family lawyers are interested in how people create their family units just as much as we are the sad issue of separation. And we've had more and more inquiries from people who are thinking about assisted reproduction. It seems to me to have been an area that's been quite badly impacted by the pandemic. And I wanted just to ask you a few questions about your perspective as a medical practitioner. And this is really with a view to trying to give people helpful information about how the lockdown has impacted on ART and how we can hopefully find positive ways forward for people. So first of all, how do you think your field has been affected by the pandemic and lockdown?
Well, it's been affected hugely. Basically, towards the end of February, the HFEA said that all treatment in the UK had to stop by early April. And of course, that meant that women were going through treatment at the time. And if they were lucky enough before that deadline to be able to have an embryo transfer, they could. But if they were through the process but weren't getting to the stage of embryo transfer, it either had to stop before they started injections, or they got to the stage of egg retrieval, but then any embryos that were suitable for freezing had to be frozen, and they couldn't have a fresh embryo transfer. So, and that was a huge thing for patients. You're building up for months beforehand, and then it all suddenly stops, and it was devastating for everybody. It's also important, now if you've got embryos frozen, at least those are frozen, but time is of course marching on. For those patients who couldn't even start treatment, as each month passes over the age of 34, your odds of IVF being successful drop by about 0.3% per month. Now, to take that into perspective, if you're only got a 15%, say, chance of it working, 6 months later, that's dropped down to 13%, which is proportionately a massive drop. Whereas if you're starting off, if you're relatively young, in your late 20s, and you've got a 60% chance of it working, then 6 months later, it's dropped down to 58%. That's not such a huge drop. But for older patients, it was a massive hit. And then since we've reopened, then obviously we've got to play catch up and try and catch up with these patients as well.
And what is the position now? Can people looking to start a family access treatment?
They can. So from the middle of May, the HFEA allowed clinics to then apply to restart. So we had to complete quite an extensive questionnaire. I think it was 57, 58 points that we had to cover for how to create a COVID secure environment, what things we actually had to do in order to treat patients. So we at GCRM, we actually started treating patients again. We got a clearance really quickly because we were anticipating all of this. Started treating patients again from kind of early June. But you're still playing catch up because we'd lost all those patients from going back to the end of February. And it's also been much slower because you're having to clean down the rooms, sanitize, scan rooms, theatre. All our outpatient consultations are now done by Zoom or Teams. So that hasn't changed greatly from the outpatient point of view, but the actual throughput of patients has been affected. Patients now wait in our car park. We phone them when they're ready to come in because we're only allowed a certain number of patients in the building at a time, again, to try and create this COVID secure environment. And the other aspect of things is that, we're generating an awful lot of waste, and there's a lot of plastic going into the environment because we're having to wear masks, change masks, all these sort of things. And that's true of everywhere. And, and I'm fairly eco-friendly. I try to be. And so this is something that probably isn't getting a huge amount of coverage anywhere in the press. And we're now seeing masks being discarded in the streets and stuff. It's all going into landfill. But from a patient point of view, it's a bit slower than it used to be. So we're not back to normal, inverted commas, but we're kind of getting there.
Yeah, it's a really anxious time for people. What about people trying to access treatment abroad? Do you think that's been affected?
Um, the government guidelines change from day to day as to where you are allowed to go and what you're allowed to do. Officially, if you're traveling for medical treatment, you don't actually have to self-isolate when you come back. But nevertheless, places like Spain, which I think at the moment are still, you're having to self-isolate. So I think in the spirit of the whole communities in general, if you go into places like Spain, you ought to self-isolate when you come back again. Other places in Europe, Prague, I don't know what the situation is in places like that. Just actually, interestingly on that point though, even in the UK, the HFEA recommends that patients who are having treatment, so UK patients having treatment within the UK, they should self-isolate as well. Meanwhile, in the real world, we have to get on with our lives. And, there's degrees of self-isolation, I suppose. You still need to go and get the groceries. You might still need to go into work for, whatever work you do. A teacher cannot self-isolate in the truest sense, but you can put things in place to mitigate the risks of transmission. So, yeah, if you go to a restaurant now, staff are wearing masks and things. If you're booking in a hotel, there are screens up, and in shops and things, there are screens up. So these things you can do, but even in the UK, there is this advice to self-isolate as much as you can.
And one of the areas that we've seen a rise in inquiries around is international surrogacy. Now, it's not something that's terribly common still, but do you think that has been impacted by COVID?
I suppose it probably has been. As you say, it's not common, so I'm not hugely familiar with it. The same rules will apply if you're going to, surrogacy, for instance, in Spain is illegal, so you can't go to Spain. But if a country where surrogacy happens, when you come back, if that's part of this, if it's part of an air corridor, then okay, that's great. But if it's not, you'll have to self-isolate as well. That's just the COVID side of things. The whole area of international surrogacy has always been a complex area.
Yeah, it's a big area. And I suppose what this conversation is highlighting to me is that the importance of finding supportive advice, medical advice and support through the process, which brings me on to the wellbeing issue. We care, obviously, as family lawyers and as medics, I'm sure, about people's wellbeing. This already stressful field will be made even more stressful by these restrictions and rules. What do you think people can do just to help themselves from a wellbeing perspective?
Well, I think really you hit the nail on the head there, because the whole assisted reproductive area, ART, is hugely stressful. You then added this onto it, which is added to the stress, and particularly for patients in their 30s, late 30s, early 40s, who appreciate that it's having a massive impact on their fertility, it's even more stressful. So that has been a massive thing, which, but I think that's true of the whole population. Everyone's been affected in some way. But in this situation where success of fertility is so age dependent, and as you're getting older, it's becoming less and less likely to be successful. So things you can do are, what de-stresses one person. If it works for you, then do it, kind of thing. For me, for instance, lying on a beach is so stressful, whereas if I went for a walk in the hills, I would find that very de-stressing. So whatever works for that particular person is to be encouraged. But that's true of the general population, really, but especially for patients like this. We can't turn back the clock. We've lost these months, and we have to just say, unfortunately, we've lost them through nobody's fault. And the shutdown of IVF treatments was pan-European. It wasn't just in the UK. It was throughout, and in fact, the UK were late to shut down, and then slightly later to restart again. But we can't turn back the clock in that regard. So we now just have to work with what we've got. and work within the confines of a COVID secure environment and try and treat patients as expeditiously as we can.
Thank you very much.